So at the moment, we're getting an error where our enemies are being able to shoot themselves. Now, as an example of this in action, I'm just going to go to this enemy guy here. If I set it so that he can't move at all, he's just starting on the screen, of course he won't have the problem where he's shooting himself. If we just started playing here, he's just shooting away, that's grand. But if I was to, for example, create a duplicate of him and go to our scene view and move him there, what's happening is he's being shot by his little friend here. So if we were to have multiple enemies on the screen in a line, they'd be able to shoot each other and keep destroying each other, which obviously that would be no good to us at all. That's not what we want to be happening in our world. So what we're going to do to fix that is set it so that all our enemies, as well as their lasers, are on the same layer. They're on a specific enemy layer. And we're going to set the physics system in Unity to make sure that anything that's on the enemy layer won't be able to interact with anything else on the enemy layer. So if I go to our enemy laser to start off with, we go to layers here. There's a few different layers in action, but they're not ones we want to use, so we're going to add a new layer that we're going to call, we'll just call it the enemy layer. We'll go back into the prefabs, that's where we were. Go to our enemy laser, and we're going to set that to the enemy layer. And then on our enemy ship in the game, we're going to set that to be on the enemy layer also. We'll change the children, that's fine, it doesn't really matter too much. One other thing we want to do while we're here, we might as well make our enemy ship be a prefab, because we're obviously going to want to reuse that in the future. And then the next thing we want to do is make sure that our enemies can't run into each other. So again, I'm going to make this enemy a copy of this enemy here, so that if we play the game, we'll see now that they will shoot each other just like that. And one other thing that will happen is our enemies will also run into each other, which won't be very good. So if I just, as an example, take that first enemy and start giving him some movement speed, he'll go along and he'll run in, and whoa, that's not what we want going on either. So we don't want them to be able to interact with each other at all. So I'm going to, we'll leave that other guy there. But what we want to do is just go into Edit and go into our project settings and then go to Physics 2D. And then over here, you get this kind of cross-reference grid that shows which layers can interact with other layers. So at the moment, our enemies can interact with every other layer, and everything that you create within Unity starts off being given the default layer, except UI. UI is one of the things that will automatically be given the UI layer tag. But our enemies, now that we've given them that enemy layer, we want to make sure that where our enemy layer here interacts with our enemy layer here, we're just going to untick that. So what that means is, from this point on, anything that has the enemy layer attached to it won't be able to interact with anything else that has the enemy layer. But our player will still be able to interact with that layer, because default and enemy here on the list are having the little tick beside it, which means that they're able to interact. So just as an example, if we go back to our player, we can see our player is set on the default layer. So now let's press play, and we should see that the lasers now from this enemy will go through this one. Just perfect, there's nothing being destroyed there. And if we go back to this enemy and give him some movement, there we go. The enemy is perfectly able to pass through him, and there's no kind of problems being caused by that. And the reason we want to do that is because if, for example, I'm going to delete this original enemy, I'm going to restore this guy's movement, because generally speaking we want our enemies to be able to move a lot of the time. I'm going to apply that change. I'm going to pop another enemy into the world. Actually no, I'll just duplicate this one so that we get them in the same position. And this guy I'm going to move up to the very top. I'm going to set his Y target to be -2, and he's going to move down instead of moving up. And if we hit play, so say you might have a bunch of enemies on screen, and they come in from the screen and then they cross over and fly across each other, and you don't want them to bump into each other in the middle of the screen. So that's why it makes sense to have your enemies be able to not interact with each other at all.